Well, it's special treat time once again on the Atheist Forum. Tonight we're going to play a DVD from the Atheist Alliance Convention, which we shot in September up in Arlington, Virginia. Before I tell you about the DVD, I just want to mention briefly that starting next week, we will be moving to channel 950 if you're on the Bright House network. So if you're a Bright House subscriber and you are one of our legion of fans of the Atheist Forum, you'll need to look for us on channel 950 on Bright House. For other cable systems, we'll still be right on the same channel that we've always been located on. So much for that little piece of business. I want to talk about the DVD we're going to play tonight. It's a really amazing woman. Speaking runs about 50-some minutes. We're talking about a woman by the name of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. First gained notoriety for a film called Submission that she made with a gentleman named Theo Van Gogh. He was murdered on a public street in Amsterdam by a devout Muslim, stabbed several times, shot, tried to decapitate him. Left sticking in his chest was a note saying that Ayaan Hirsi Ali would be next to be murdered for having insulted Islam. Her book, Infidel, is in the top 10 bestseller lists for nonfiction. She has a fatwa on her head. Her requires 24-hour security and basically is almost a prisoner in her own home. But she is a very brave woman, and her story is very fascinating. So I think that for those of you who are interested in the subject of religion, who are interested in what it's like to grow up in an Islamic society, what it's like to break away from an Islamic society and to declare yourself a non-believer, an open atheist, and to then be subject to constant death threats and the threat of constant death, that you will find this a very fascinating DVD. So without further ado, and we will roll the DVD, please enjoy it, and I look forward to talking to you again in about an hour.
George Orwell began his fine essay, Shooting an Elephant, by describing the first time in his life he had been important enough to be hated by large groups of people. By that criterion, nobody here is more important than our next speaker, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It is one thing to be disliked by religious extremists, as most of us are, but quite another to be under a constant threat of death through fatwas. To the disgust of many Muslim fanatics, Hirsi Ali produced a film called Submission about domestic violence by Muslim men against Muslim women. She courageously refused to submit to Islamic abuses or be silent about them. She has received numerous awards for her human rights work, and in 2005 was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. We may all be infidels of one sort or another, but there is only one person in this room who could write the book about being an infidel. And a fascinating book it is, a compelling personal story of childhood horrors and repression, and the courage it took for her to break away from the world of faith to enter the world of reason and publicly embrace atheism. It is my pleasure to present Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Oh my goodness, this is so intimidating. I was asked to speak to you about a journey from the world of faith to the world of reason. It is a personal story, and it's subjective. On a social and cultural level, such a journey can be very long, taking many hundreds of years, and for an individual, it may last a span of moments, the time for one object to collide with another, one world with another. As is natural, I have been shaped by the context of my life, so I must speak to you from this context and tell you something of that life. I was brought up a Sunni Muslim, not a Shia or a Baha'i, an Ahmadiyya or an Ismaili or a Sufi, not a Christian or a Buddhist, Hindu or Jain. I am from Somalia. Not Yemen, Morocco, Mexico or Japan. I come from a specific time and place, and I landed in a specific time and place, and that's the story I'm going to tell you. And by doing so, I hope to illustrate the difference between a state of mind of faith and that of reason, and what it may mean for one individual to travel across that divide. I was born 37 years ago in Somalia. I was raised by my mother and grandmother. My father was largely absent. Polygamy is an accepted part of Somalia and of the Islamic faith. My father's first wife, Mariam, gave him a daughter, Arro, about 4 years before he married my mother. My father did not tell Mariam he had married again until my mother had 2 children already, my older brother Mahat and myself. Mariam was studying in the United States at the time, at Columbia University in New York. When Mariam returned to Mogadishu and discovered that my father had another wife, she was already pregnant with her second daughter, my half-sister Ichabo. Although taking a second wife is quite customary in the society in which she had been raised, Mariam had been exposed to Western ideas, and she no longer embraced this custom. She was outraged and gave my father an ultimatum. She told him to choose. It goes against common decency within my clan, the Darod, and against Islamic law for a man to divorce a pregnant woman. So my father waited until Ichabo was born and then gave Mariam the answer she dreaded. He divorced her. During this time, the young nation of Somalia was taken over by a young sergeant in the army, Siad Barre, who established a dictatorship my father did not support. My father was jailed for years for his political activities in defiance of this dictator, and his escape from jail came through the aid of a clan member who was later killed for his part in the escape. When I was 8 years old, my mother smuggled Mahat, me, and our little sister Hawa out of Somalia into Saudi Arabia. There, we girls had to live behind closed doors at all times, unless my brother or father could accompany us out of the house. In fact, when we first arrived in the country, my father was not there to fetch us from the airport, and as a woman, my mother did not have the right to move about the city by herself. We were stranded there until finally a male clan member came to rescue us. In school in Saudi Arabia, the teacher called me a slave because I was black and taught that Jews were evil and conspired against good Muslims. After a year, we were deported from Saudi Arabia, fortunately, because of my father's continuing political activities. For a little over a year, we lived in Ethiopia at the headquarters of the exile army in which my father was a leading organizer. When I was 11, my father moved us to Kenya, where he soon left us once again. This time, I did not see him almost for a decade. It was in a Somali community in Kenya that I lived until I was 23. My mother brought us up very strictly. Being a good Muslim girl really boiled down to 2 ideals: obedience and chastity. We were supposed to submit to her, to our brother, and to our elders in the clan. We were not supposed to have any independent or impure thoughts. My mother didn't want my sister Hawa and me to go to school, but fortunately my father insisted. So it was that we learned English, and so it was that we entered the world of books. These were not classics or literary masterpieces. They were Nancy Drew adventures and slashy romance novels. The kind of thing teenage girls like to read. But they were my first glimpses of a foreign world, one where girls like me were free to make their own choices. In a conflicting parallel, I was a devout Muslim. When I was 16, I chose to wear a full hijab. I was one of the first girls in my school to go about with my body and hair completely hidden in a black veil, with only my face showing. I was quite proud of the fact. I embraced the puritanical interpretation of Islam as we had practiced in Saudi Arabia. I went to lectures and joined youth religious groups and was enamored of the nascent movement of the Muslim Brotherhood. I saw in this a way to be good, to be pure, to have order and consistency in my life. My personal expression of faith was one of the few choices I had, one of the few places where I was free to search for a personal identity. Paradoxically, the expression I was choosing required me to efface more and more of myself, to submit my will completely, to hand my life and my destiny over to Islam, Muhammad and Allah. In retrospect, I think that while I welcomed the challenge of attaining purity, my mind rebelled against the submission in spite of myself. Already the world of faith and the world of reason were at war within me. When I was older, I returned to Somalia with my sister, Hawa. Soon we were followed by large portions of the Somali people. The civil war in Somalia had been growing for decades, and about 2 weeks after we arrived, all hell broke loose. There was open warfare around the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Siad Barre was evicted, an event we all welcomed. But then the southern Hawiye clans began a violent campaign to cleanse all foreign elements from Mogadishu and Hawiye lands. Foreign meant my clan, the Darod, originally from northern Somalia. Some Darod fled the city. Others fought back, using tactics just as brutal as the Hawiye. The Hawiye themselves were divided. The Abgal subclan followed Ali Mahdi, and the Habargadir subclan were loyal to Aidid. Meanwhile, the Isaq in the north developed a taste for ethnic cleansing and internecide warfare, and the Darod too fought among themselves and with the Isaq. American soldiers were sent into this mayhem in 1993, and the world got to see exactly what a tribal, clan-based society can become. Millions of Somalis have been displaced since then, tens of thousands killed, wounded, and starved to death. Where there is no reasonable shared discourse, no community of values, where the individual is not respected just for the sake of it, then the common currency of power becomes violence. At the time, growing within this chaos and alongside the clan divisions was a group of Islamic radicals. These men were trained in Quranic schools in Saudi Arabia and funded by Wahhabi money. They sought to impose Sharia or Islamic rule on Somalis who could not afford to flee. In the strife, violence and terror of Somalia, this movement took root, and today, my motherland is torn by anarchy and fundamentalist Islam. Well, Islam. Every time I try to become politically correct, I stutter. One offering violent chaos and submission to the strongest, the other offering a controlled violence dictated by the laws of the Quran and submission to the will of Allah. My father rejoined my family in Kenya in 1991 when I was 22 years old. And one day he met a Somali exile at the mosque, a man called Somali, a Darod, and therefore a distant relative who lived in Canada and who was looking for a suitable, docile Somali bride to take home. The two of them struck a deal. And though I begged my father not to do it, I was married off to this man in a ceremony I refused to attend. My rights as a woman were such that my presence of consent was not required, and it was perfectly legal for my father to represent me in this unison, even against my will. On my way to Canada to join my new husband, I stopped over in Europe. I was shocked and amazed at the order, the cleanliness, and the kindness I found in this Western world. This nation of infidels. Women walked the streets with their arms and shoulders bare. They were not attacked, raped, or stoned. Men and women held hands, kissed in the streets. My world was turned upside down, like Alice in Wonderland, and I no longer knew what to think. I somehow found the courage to flee from my marriage, my family, and my clan, and I asked for asylum in Holland as a political refugee. I wasn't really a political refugee. You can't ask for asylum on the grounds of forced marriage, but the Dutch government gave me board and lodging, and I was ultimately given refugee status. I learned the Dutch language, I made Dutch friends, I worked as an interpreter, translating for Somalis in Dutch hospitals, women's shelters, schools and prisons, and seeing the misery of these immigrant women's lives. I saw them beaten, circumcised, and raped, this time in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam, and in Utrecht. I saw their ignorance and their mistrust of this Western society in which they found themselves, which was so eager to help, yet so incompetent to do so. I went to the University of Leiden to study political science. After everything I had seen, the chaos I had lived, and the contrast I saw every day between Somali immigrants and Dutch society, I wanted to find out why Holland, a land of infidels, may have peace and order when Somalis and Muslims did not. I read Spinoza, Popper, Bertrand Russell. Whole worlds of knowledge and thought began opening up to me. It was a journey into hundreds of years of contestation, of independent thinking, and I marveled at the agility and impudence of these minds. Then came September 11, 2001, and Osama bin Laden claimed the Quran justified hurling planefuls of innocent people into buildings, killing thousands. My mind rebelled, and the dissonance between what I was seeing and the morals I found in my heart would not let me rest. I looked, not wanting to really know, and found exactly what bin Laden had said, written there within the holy book of the Quran. And Allah did indeed sanctify the killing of innocents to the extent that an infidel might be innocent. I found violence right there in the heart of Islam, in black and white. The world of prison can be uncomfortable. It does have the sense of community. It does not have the sense of community that you feel in a clan, be it cultural or religious. In every country I grew up, clan and tribe were paramount. When everybody knows about everybody, there is a remarkable and comforting sense of longing. But in a clan, there is no autonomy. The individual has no opportunity to choose his, and especially her, own destiny. And without this freedom, there's no true sense of personal responsibility. Clans attain control by instilling shame and fear into individuals. In the case of my culture, these two elements, shame and fear, were especially instilled into women. We were mutilated so that we were hobbled physically and literally and branded. Our minds were trained and bullied into submission, into obedience to our fathers, our brothers, and our elders. This was imposed on me not only by my culture, but also through justification of my religion. Though truthfully today, the two are so intertwined you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Whether in the Ummah, the Islamic tribe, or in the Darod, my duty as a girl was to subjugate the self, to submit to the will of many and to Allah. One of the tools used to gain this submission is fear, and fear is bred by ignorance and superstition. And before I turned 23, fear governed my life. I feared my parents, and they taught me to fear God. Everywhere around me, morality was understood only through Allah. A moral framework outside of religion was unimaginable and simply did not exist. Good was not found in the hearts and minds of men, and most definitely not within women. We feared the judgment of God, and we feared the evil within ourselves. And just as ignorance and superstition breed fear, so does fear breed suspicion. My parents did not trust each other. I did not trust my parents. My parents did not trust me. Our school teachers did not trust us. We did not trust them. and we definitely did not trust the state, as they equally did not trust their citizens. The world of reason that I encountered in my latter 20s has an infrastructure to govern human relationships, which is derived not from a divine power, but from human rationale. There is a separation of private faith from the state, a division of powers, recourse through elections and legal systems. There is a free press, freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of religion, and equal opportunity for men and women, blacks and whites, gays and heterosexuals. The sacred here is the right of the individual, the life of the individual, and the protection of civil liberties. Without divine intervention, man is able to do good for his neighbor. Under secular law, we are able to grant freedom and independence without degenerating into violence and chaos. That is the world of reason I came to, and it is a great privilege. To live according to reason means to exercise independent thought in a society that is structured by discussion and which recognizes the rights of individuals to choose their own destiny. It is a world based on trust and equality. It's a much better place to live in than the world of faith, which is a world of submission and oppression. Many forget that by a secular state, we do not mean a state that forbids religion or favors one religion over others, but a state that allows people of different faiths to coexist, including those who choose not to have a faith in God. For immigrants into this world, acceptance of these secular conditions is often impossible, as it clashes too directly with their belief system. Friedrich Hayek put it so neatly: freedom is inseparable from responsibility. Having made the journey from faith to reason, both intellectually and culturally, I may say with conviction that society works better when governed by reason. Faith comes in many forms, and while the expression of morality may be subjective, human rights are not. No God, no religious text, no organized system of faith is better at dictating right and wrong than that compass we are born with in our heads, the instincts that are coded into our genes. I've seen much good come from man, but very little from God. If I must place my faith somewhere, I choose to place it in reason. And thank God I have the freedom to choose.
I'll tell them to line up here. Thank you for a wonderful talk about your courageous life. People who would like to ask questions, can you please come up to the front and use the microphone here?
One simple biographical question. I'm startled by your eloquence, and I've seen you handle question and answer sessions on C-SPAN deftly. where did you learn English on top of the other languages?
I think what might shock a lot of people is I learned English in Kenya. And English was in Kenya because of the British Empire. And unfortunately, for those people who believe that the British Empire has done only wrong, I only want to say there were good things about the British Empire, which I still appreciate.
Matthew Chapman, one of the earlier speakers, I believe was the first in this convention to make a comment about the fact that women tend, well, let's put it this way, of atheists, more than 50% are men. And women often tend to be the most fervent believers and enforcers of religion in their own families. And you, coming from two different cultures, and I now count you as coming from Western culture as well because you've embraced it, and thank you. I wonder what light you can shed on this. I mean, basically my question is, what the hell? Why are women not atheists? We stand to lose the most from religion.
In the world of reason that I encountered, those girls who are brought up to become independent and self-reliant and follow a path that makes them believe that once they grow up, they can shape their own destiny, I see no difference between men and women. But in a world of faith, where girls are indoctrinated to believe in their own submission, those women who, in talking in Charles Darwin's terms, become very successful in surviving in that coercive and oppressive environment, tend to become almost fundamentalist, more fundamentalist than the men in preserving that. It is what they know, it's where they derive their power from. And there are two different forms of power, and there's the colors, manly, testosterone-driven sort of power that we all recognize as violence. But there's also the manipulative, mothers-in-laws trying to force their daughters-in-laws to do things that they dreaded and disliked to be done to them. Grandmothers circumcising their daughters. The whole point of honor killings, it's all women who gossip and who go and tell the menfolk, your daughter was seen there and that by that and that, she was holding hands with a man, and so on and so forth. So yes, I am a witness to more women embracing superstition than men. But once all individuals are free to make their own choices, and you're free from the fear of hell, and the women I encountered in the Netherlands, in a free context, but then, for instance, from Somalia, who decided to stay in environments that were violent and abusive to them, they all based their reason for staying in that environment by saying, I don't care about my husband beating me. I have to bear with that. What I truly fear is God and the hereafter. I have to sacrifice my life here on earth so that I will be rewarded in the hereafter. And I think that the first and foremost step for women living under oppression is to free themselves from that concept of hell.
This isn't really a question, but I would kill myself if I didn't talk to you. When I was 18 years old, I fell in love with a beautiful Somalian woman, and we dated for 5 years, and I was witness to the conflict that was occurring in her family between her mother and father and her siblings and her, and it ultimately tore our relationship apart. We tried and tried and tried, and I watched as she struggled between Western secular ideas and the ideas that she had been raised under. And just so happens we're still friends. And I talked to her, told her that I'd be seeing you this week, and she said, if you get an opportunity, tell her thank you. And I just want to express her gratitude and mine for your stand and your beauty and your wonderful, wonderful opposition to what is ailing this planet. Thank you.
First,
First, I want to say that your book was inspiring to me and full of fascinating details. I'm going to speak a little bit more about it later this evening in my own talk. And I have a question which actually echoes a point that was just made. You have, with incredible courage, walked away from your Muslim tradition, your Muslim heritage. You've stepped out of it. There are some very brave Muslim women who are trying to stay within the church and reform it from within. I think, for instance, of Irshad Manji in Toronto. And I wonder if you have anything to say about whether you think you, now really completely outside Islam, can help other women in Islam liberate themselves and change Islam itself, or do you think that's just hopeless and it's atheism or nothing?
First, I want to say, ideally, I also did not want to get out. I wanted to be a part of my family and my clan, and I wanted to belong, and it was very difficult. Unlike Irshad, I had a conversation with Irshad and was like, strategically, it's better to remain inside and change things from within. And I told her, but what about the dissonance? I mean, I can carry on for 5 minutes and pretend to be a Muslim. But after a while, I just can't. And I can't deal with that kind of dissonance. I can't deal with that kind of self-deception. It's just what I've liberated myself from. And then the next question is, but if my father and if my mother, I have to make a choice, but they also have to make a choice. And if they have to make a choice between me or their God and hell, then they put me in this world, and it's a choice they have to make. And I've declared my love for them, and I'm open to that. And the dissonance that comes with their choice, that of parents having to choose between what they believe in me, their child, for me, the same was a dissonance between being appalled and disgusted by what Muhammad has to say and what is in the Quran, and then pretending to all the people with whom I belong, that's fine, but you can change it and you can twist around. I could not live with that dissonance. I know people who can't live with it. I know people who have gone mad. I know people who just try and glide out of it, others who go into apathy. And people like Irshad think that strategically it's very efficient and you can change it from within. Is it effective or is it efficient? I think I can put the same question to you and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. When you write these books, what do you expect? Do you expect you're going to have any influence on people who are believers? Personally, I think what you should do, no, I will let you answer. I will let you answer in a second. I'll let you answer in a second, but I just want to say, personally, I think when we say help, my definition of helping these women and men is to cause as much dissonance as possible so that it becomes so unbearable so that it becomes so unbearable that for those of them who do not go mad, at least that they can go sane and have them lead their reason. Now you can ask.
Oh, thank you. I think that's my answer too. That we need as many different approaches as we can to keep the dissonance up. We should expect to be loathed and hated and feared by many. But if we have many different voices speaking to different elements, we have the best chance of not just being written off as a sort of marginalized lunatic fringe.
I've read your terrific book, and I'm full of admiration for you, for your having endured all the obstacles that you had to overcome. But now I'm wondering, is it boring? What's your life like? What are you doing now, and is it fulfilling?
It is boring if you have to repeat the same message over and over and over again, believe me. It's tedious. I need intellectual challenge, and I'm not getting as much as I think that I need to get, because I'm prepared. Is it fulfilling? I think when the young man who was here tells me about his girlfriend, who is a Somali, who says, greet her, and every email I receive from Somalis and from Muslims, and sometimes even from Christians who say, I recognize what you're talking about, I relate to it, then it's fulfilling. And so it is both boring and fulfilling.
Hi, I just wanted you to remedy my ignorance, and if people know the answer to my question, I apologize, but I'm sure there are a lot of other people in my position. I wanted to ask you about the position, or indeed perhaps even the existence of atheism in majority Muslim societies. Does it exist? If it does, what are its parameters? Did you ever have a private conversation with somebody who confessed perhaps to doubt? Or I guess what I'm getting at is maybe not unrelated to what Dan asked you. Are you the thin edge of a wedge that is beginning to sort of create an atheist space in majority Muslim societies, or is indeed one already there, albeit a very small and covert one?
I read a remark yesterday that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was in Columbia University, and he claimed that there are no gays in Iran. So if I were to say there are no atheists in Islam, I would be making the same kind of preposterous remark and joke. The thing is, in Islam, you are defined an atheist if you display any form of doubt. If you think that Muhammad as a moral guide might not have had it all correct. If you ask the question, he got the revelation from the angel Gabriel, how does Gabriel look like? And you're already declared an atheist and an infidel. You're not supposed to ask any questions at all. So to be declared an infidel in Islam is, for instance, different from being declared an infidel in Christianity, where you can abolish hell, and you can, like the Dutch Catholic bishop, say, in the churches we can call God Allah and still be a Catholic. You can't do that in Islam. You profess any form of doubt and you are an atheist. I know that there are lots of, when I was growing up and asking the same questions, there are a lot of young people who have and had, and I still meet them, ask the same questions as I have done, and who just don't want to take that last step. Would it be correct, would it be accurate to label them atheists? A friend of mine who's a professor in the Netherlands, Paul Clitu, says they're just crypto-atheists. And they know that that is just atheism ultimately. But it's not a conscious atheism like the one I've gone through, as in answering the question, did God make man, or did man make God? And coming to the conclusion, God was manufactured by man.
The current state of Islam is far from positive, and the trajectory is downright scary. But do you see a positive vision for the future?
Yeah, I see, yes. Okay, there are those of us who call themselves optimists, and there are those of us who call themselves pessimists. The problem with optimists is you have to draw a line between being optimistic and delusional. With pessimists, you have to draw the line between being a pessimist and paranoid. I consider myself an optimist, but a realist in the sense that Islam is a huge challenge, and it's getting bigger, and the complacency in the West is great. God is the only God, Allah is the only God in town, at least here in the West, and it's a terrible God. So I don't underestimate it. Terrible things might happen, especially with nuclear weapons in the hands of fanatics and other weapons. But I think to give up all hope and to say that, we are going to be destroyed anyway, let's just lie back and let it happen. No, I haven't quite acquired that attitude yet.
Hello. I have two questions for you. One is a personal one, and one is a little more, it actually takes off on the last question. First of all, you spoke of that moment of freedom when your wings flew, when you left your homeland and came to Holland, France. And what are your inspirations today that continue that movement? First question. And then my second question is, what do you offer me in practical terms as a member of the human race, along with you, in activism here in the United States specifically, to give as far as what we can do to advance, it's a big one.
Yeah, and I think both questions are interrelated. It's comfortable to be an atheist and liberal and enlightened, lie back and see religious people and fanatics preach their faith and win hearts and minds and become bigger and bigger, and criticize that and condemn it and do nothing. So at one point, activism becomes inevitable. And it's not because for the sake of activism, but because you want the world to go in a certain direction. And you want people to be, we all want people to be like us, enlightened and reasonable and so on. And we know that that doesn't come easy and it doesn't come cheap, and we have to compete with those people who go from door to door, who go build madrasas, who go build preaching houses and so on, to preach the rivers of modernity and civilization. They just want to take civilization back. People want us to go back into tribalism, because this whole God business is about nothing else than but going back into what I just described among the Somali tribe. Now, having seen that and knowing that, I know that that's not any place I want to go back to. And I'm a pacifist in the sense that I don't want to shoot a gun, so I won't go into the military. But this is then what I can do. I can just as much compete with them and think, if you can't proselytize what you believe in, I'll proselytize what I believe in, and let's see where we end up. And I'd rather have that competition than the sense of powerlessness and inadequacy that it brings with just watching fanatics sort of take over the place.
I have a question, but first I'd like to make a comment about our own situation with regard to women and liberation in this country. 37 years ago, there was a call by women's organizations for women to go on strike for a day, and that was a very powerful day. I lay to bed most of the night deciding whether or not to do it, and the resulting 24 hours were not easy. At any rate, I'll go on to my question. I'm doing research on an abusive relationship situation for a book I'm working on about 200 years ago in this country. This leads me to my question of, how do abusers start as abusers? Now, I've noticed in your book, and I've seen in other circumstances, that it looks like Muslim men are raised to be little princelings, lords and masters, far too early before they really have good sense. But what I'm wondering is, are the women who are raising them, when they're really small, when they're infants and toddlers, are they have so much anger in them that they do things that are abusive to these helpless babies before they have any memory of it, that causes them to be more abusive as they get older? And I don't know how much you've seen of other people's child rearing, but that's a question that comes to me.
I don't want to be so deterministic as to say, abuse leads to abuse in a way that it can't be changed. So if you grow up in an abusive home, you will definitely turn out to be an abuser. I don't want to say that. And I also don't know where it begins, where the abuse begins and and then the change starts, so that people who become aware of being abused find out that it's something bad and then don't repeat it. But I know from the tribal context, where people live in fear, you're afraid of your parents, you're afraid of your teachers, you're afraid of everyone around you, that in that world, violence, be it verbal or physical or sexual, it pays, and it pays on the short term. It's never a long-term thing, and people don't really plan it. They don't plan to destroy anything like that. They're not aware of, they just enhance the bad side in themselves. Where does it start? I don't know. What I know very well is you can end it, and I also know that the people living in an abusive context don't like it. People don't like to live in that tension. And you have a crowd, and you have the crowd mentality. And once you look at that, the single individuals, and you pick them out, none of them wants it, and all of them want change. And I think that's where the proselytizers from religious groups, and especially Islam, come in, because they say, we can change it. As of now, we are going to do things differently. We're going to follow the code of Allah, and peace will come, and love and prosperity. And then you kind of go from, what was it, the frying pan into the fire.
Listening to you talk about the changes you've made and giving up the religion you knew as a child, and having done that same thing, what impact did it have on your relationship with your family, with your mother, your sisters, your brothers?
It shocked my mother. My mother really believes that hell is something concrete. It's something next door. She asked me when I told her that I no longer believed in God. I told her over the telephone, and she was quiet for something like 2 minutes, and I felt it was the first time that my mother had ever listened to me. And she was the one who always did the talking. And it shocked her, and she asked me the question, how can you ask me to send my child to hell? And I said, but Mama, there's no hell. And she couldn't get over it. And I think that she still really did not get over the shock. My mother thinks I'm probably mentally ill. My father asked me to be discreet and not to tell people that I'm an atheist. And when I said, but what if they ask me? He said, tell them it's impolite to ask people of their religions. And that's not consistent with his earlier upbringing, which was preach unto the infidels of Islam, in which case I would ask, are you a Muslim or not? And if you were to say no, then I would tell you. So he by that way, he preached against his own principles. My brother, whom I really suspect is an atheist, but will never come out of it, but that's my suspicion. The last time I spoke to him, it was early this year, and he said, fine, you want to be an atheist, but why take on 1 billion people? And it's that remark that made me think of, I thought he's much smarter than I am, and I thought and hoped that he is also found enlightenment. The rest of the family members it's either the religion or you, and for them it's the faith, and it's very clear and it's very well defined. It's that complex.
Your prepared marks were quite extraordinary and very persuasive. But what I found even more interesting were the little asides that showed your personhood, that were charming and funny. And in 2 cases, one where you talked about fundamentalist Muslims and then sort of hinted at that being a redundancy. And then following that with a little bit of the, well, I'm not always politically correct. It was just charming. But it also brought to mind something that some of my culturally self-identified Muslim friends who are agnostics say. And this is going to be a hard question. Do you think you take on Islam with a different kind of antagonism than you take on other religions? There are a lot of them that resent your doing it. And I'm somewhat agnostic as to whether or not that's a valid position.
Yes, I take on Islam with a different sort of antagonism than I do with other religions. First, because today the amount of aggression and violence in the name of a religion that we witness all over the world, most of it is committed in the name of Islam. I was born into Islam, and the number of people taking on Christianity and Judaism who know it far better than I do, many of them in this room today, are doing a wonderful job. I don't have anything to add to Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or God is not great. Well, Hitchens went all ecumenical with all the religions. But I don't have anything to add to that. These people are more brilliant than I am. And I'm also drawing on the history of Western society, where I was exposed to getting out of the box, as they call it, getting out of your own community and looking inside with a critical eye. And I can do that with Islam. So if we do a division of labor, then I would say, yes, I'm taking on Islam because it is the most prominent, but also it's the religion I know the most about.
Before I ask the question, which I was mulling over for some time whether I should ask it or not, I'd like to ask further that I hope you have the time to leave a little more of yourself with your signature and books that we've purchased here, because you are a treasure. My question has to do with political and religious alignments. I attended the Secular Islam Summit, I believe it was earlier this year, yes, February, in St. Petersburg, Florida. Your absence was painful. But except for me and one other member of the local Center for Inquiry, the Center for Inquiry, which has a generally atheist membership, which earlier you combined with atheism, we liberals and atheists. The center sponsored it. But I don't think there was anybody other than us two there who was to the left of Attila the Hun. There was absolutely no media coverage outside of some of Rupert Murdoch's enterprises, Glenn Beck of CNN, and Bret Stephens of the Wall Street Journal. There was the local paper, center, liberal-oriented, owned by a nonprofit organization, printed not a word even about the existence of the summit. Of some of the people unnamed, that's become current this month because he's published a book virtually suggesting the elimination of Iran, is Michael Lidon. I know you are with the American Enterprise Institute. At the summit, virtually nothing was right about Islam. I was recently, and everything was right about the U.S. I was recently at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta, where almost nothing was right about the U.S., and everything was right about Palestine and most elements in the Middle East. Where do you stand? Where can one make sense of these alignments or misalignments?
I can't explain the absence of media in that conference. I think it was good news, and good news doesn't sell. That may be it. It's good news that there are Muslims who have become ex-Muslims and who are coming out and saying that they're atheists. And I don't know why the New York Times wasn't there. I find that I find it newsworthy, and that's something that should have been on the news. So I can't explain that part. I want to defend Michael Ledeen and his book and say he's not proposing to annihilate Iran. In fact, unlike Podorists, he is, and unlike me, he is like, we should not use military means. He doesn't want to bomb Iran. So you read the book again, and that's the argument, the case that he is making. Where do I stand in this? I think that if freedom is attacked, it's one thing to say you're against violence, but as a liberal, you can't just say, you can't abolish politics. And as long as there is politics, meaning there's conflict among peoples, and some of them are willing to use violence, then logically you must be able to defend yourself. So it's military, but only in self-defense. When the state of Iran declares war on the state of Israel and says we are going to wipe you off the map, if you are the political leaders in Israel, you are going to see how big your army is. That is, you have to look into your inventory of how you can defend yourself. And I think that is, for me, that is where military violence comes in. But radical Islam, the yearning for the caliphate and how that is spread, a third of it is ideology, a third of it is through emigration, hijrah, and a third of it is military, jihad. My take on it is defend yourself against all three and go on the offensive on all three where appropriate. You can't, when people spread pamphlets, you can't just go bombing them, you also spread your own pamphlets. But when they apply jihad, violence, then you apply violence and make sure that that doesn't happen. It seems common sense, but I understand how complex the situation is, because it's no longer a war where people are wearing uniform and there's a state and a military, and so it's no longer that straightforward. And because it's not that straightforward, we have to be smarter than they are. But ultimately it means when we say this is an open society, you have to, you still need to have the characteristics of an open society. Otherwise you'll be like them.
Modern American Muslim women are very different from Muslim women in the Middle East. They have a great deal of freedom. They're content, dare I say, even happy with the situation here. How do you convince someone like that that the grass is greener on the other side?
Cause dissonance.
May I have your permission to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize?
Are you honoring?
Thank you.